All right, today we're answering the million-dollar question, does technique matter? Or actually, let's answer a better question, how much does technique matter? Because I think that's a little bit more appropriate. And I think the main reason that this discussion is coming up is because, historically, I think there's been an overemphasis on the importance of technique, but then there's been the emergence of all these new ideas such as movement optimism, and it's sort of led to this pendulum swing, or maybe it's just people consuming a lot of these ideas through short form content only, not understanding the nuance, and it's led people to believe that maybe technique doesn't matter at all, or this idea that people are pushing the idea that technique doesn't matter, and this isn't really it either. So we're going to discuss exactly how much technique really matters, and then just add some context to this conversation. Why are people de-emphasizing the importance of being neurotic about technique? Or maybe better, what are some of the drawbacks of overemphasizing the importance of technique, and how does that affect our training outcomes as well? All right, so as I take you through this discussion, I'm also going to be going through a GPP workout. So if you'd like the look of this program and you want to try it out, you can get a week of it for free from the links down below. All right, so we've got a couple of sets of duck walks and then some light hops to get the juices flowing. Okay, and the technique to get the most out of these is use the weight to counterbalance, to sit your ass behind your feet and then just roll across that whole foot from the heel to the toe. Moving on to the next part of our warm-up, which is horizontal into vertical leaps. So one of my favorite variations. All right, so going back to the start of all this, I would say that the main reason there's been this pendulum swing against the idea of good technique or the importance of good technique is because we used to have this idea that lifting weights was a really dangerous and risky activity, and therefore it was of the highest importance to have good technique to protect you from injuries. Now that we have a little bit more of a sophisticated understanding of how injuries actually happen, what we've realized is that technique probably just dictates where you get hurt, not how much you get hurt or the risk of injury or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, there's just a fundamental level of risk or certain forces that have to be distributed throughout the system to accomplish whatever task or whatever lift that you're trying to do. Or the greatest example of this would be a lot of people used to think that heel striking was bad jogging technique, for example, because it puts a lot more stress on your knee. So a lot of people got encouraged to go for more of a forefoot strike, and then all of a sudden we get more Achilles injuries. So again, I think that's a really great demonstration of technical changes. Yeah, they can impact where the stress goes, but stress has still got to go somewhere. And so a lot of people, they would sort of think about this within lifting. A lot of people would probably try to lift with the technique where it doesn't place as much stress on the back. The back is an area of the body that a lot of people really worry about injuring, and we have different attitudes towards hurting that versus, for example, our knee or maybe more of our leg muscles. But pretty much every structure in your body adapts to the stresses that we place on it. So if we're using a lifting technique that maybe shields our back from some of the stress, it's just not going to get as strong. I mean, it doesn't need to be, but yeah, it's just one of those things where the stress has to go somewhere. And there's no technique out there that's going to make a 200 kilo barbell put less force through your body. Like I said, it's just a matter of where it's going to go and how resilient you want those parts of your body to be through the training process and adaptation. So many people talk about the potential risk of not caring enough about technique, but I think what's really under-discussed and underappreciated by a lot of technique zealots is what are the risks of caring about technique too much? I just have so many distinctive memories, especially in the early days of my lifting journey, of someone with a little bit more experience trying to scare the absolute living shit out of me that I was going to permanently harm myself or permanently destroy my body just because of a subtle difference in my technique versus what they recommended. And it's just, it's complete and utter bullshit. And no one should have the fear of God put in them like that, just for subtle nuances of technique. Again, I really believe that efficient technique is important for performance, but just this idea that any sort of technique is going to protect your body from the forces that we put through it with just training and sporting activities, it's stupid. So people are right when they say that, movement optimism, maybe taking some of the emphasis off the prioritization of technique just at the top of the totem pole in terms of importance as it relates to not only performance, but then also safety. What it is just a critical evaluation and trying to place technique exactly where it should be on the totem pole. So it's not the be-all, end-all when it comes to performance or whether or not you're going to get injured or how often or how severe the injury will be. Like I said, it's just a way of sort of looking at how we're distributing the forces throughout our body. And at the end of the day, we really lack certainty and real hard evidence when it comes to what sort of techniques may expose us to more injury risk. So again, it's just sort of optimism. It's like, hey, we don't know, but seeing as we don't have any really hard evidence to fear things that, deviate a little bit from what we consider textbook technique, and we're just not going to freak out about it. So we're not saying that it doesn't matter at all. It's just we're not going to be neurotic about it because like I said, so many people just get neurotic about technique, and that for sure has never served anyone. And that's ultimately what movement optimism is trying to fight. Just people being put in these mental and physical prisons over completely benign movements or subtle deviations from technique. All right, so once you've sort of adopted this movement optimist mindset, how do we think about good technique and how do we try to create that and encourage that to the right extent in our lifters and our athletes? I think the first thing that we need to think about is just coming up with some repeatable and consistent standards for the lift. So, and again, that's just about creating an arbitrary standard at the end of the day that we can adhere to and measure ourselves against so we can see if we're making progress or not. And then outside of that, honestly, we're just trying to find something that's comfortable and repeatable for the lifter. So something that doesn't make them feel awkward or like they're contorting their body or putting themselves into a position where they just feel weak or something like that. A lot of people strawman movement optimism and say things like, oh, you just don't care about your clients or your athletes' form at all. You prescribe them a hip hinge and then they're just flexing entirely through the spine. Is that acceptable under the lens of movement optimism? And I would say it's if your goal of the movement is to get a training stimulus for your ass and the back of your legs, well, no, that's not really good technique, even under the movement optimism banner, because it's not contextualized to your goals. As a movement optimist, when I'm prescribing my clients hinges with the goal of working out their backside or the back of their legs, I'm still going to keep that as a KPI though. I want them to stretch out those muscles, but maybe if towards the end of their set or at any point in their exercise, if they are flexing a little bit through their back, I'm not going to get them to freak out over it. I'm just going to be like, hey, is this really in line with our goals and with our standards that we decided on for this lift? Not some arbitrary standard that hasn't been adjusted to their context. I'm not going to scare the shit out of them and be like, hey, look, you're going to blow out your back and destroy your body for the rest of your life. And just like, hey, I don't know if this technique is serving your goals as much as it could be. Maybe we could prioritize moving a little bit differently and it would be more in line with your goals and improve the experience and your outcomes. Even when it comes to good technique, I think a lot of people will throw out this idea of joint stacking, in a squat. Keep your knee lined up with your foot, keep your hip lined up with your foot, or in a bench press, keep your wrist directly over your elbow. But even that, thinking and coming at that from a place like, oh, this makes our lift more efficient. Does it? Because sometimes in order to stack our joints, we end up increasing the range of motion of a lift. So some people sacrificing a little bit of that joint stacking, which in theory sounds like it'd be pretty efficient. You can actually improve your efficiency, you get less stacking of the joints, but you might reduce the range of motion and then get a net win in terms of efficiency. Sumo deadlifts is a great example of this, or wide stance squats or wide grip bench press. And then again, a lot of people are like, well, so then for strength, is good technique just reducing the range of motion as much as possible? And again, I would say no, it's context dependent and it's down to the individual, because for me personally, if I put my feet out all the way to the plates on a sumo deadlift trying to reduce the range of motion as much as possible, I just can't break the weight off the ground because I lose all my leverage in that position. So like I said, it's always down to the individual. It's always down to the goals of the exercise, or just, like I said, very context dependent, this idea of good technique. And even when it matters, again, the biggest thing that we're trying to remember is don't be neurotic. There's no benefit ever to being neurotic about technique, or even I would say there's a lot of danger in assuming that any given technique is safer than another, because then when you're hurt, inevitably you're probably going to get hurt at some point with any exercise that you train hard with any sort of technique. And then the amount of catastrophization when you think you've been doing everything right. What do we say to those people who have the cuck trainers who are like, just lift with a flat back and you'll be safe when they do get back pain? Because I'm telling you, when you look at the statistics, back pain comes for all of us. And they're just, I guess I don't know how they deal with that. They're not my people, not my monkeys, not my circus. I worry about the non-fragilistas in the optimist community. Shoulder's still a little bit sensitive in this higher bar position, so can't load these up as much as I would like. It's probably good, just ease our way back into things. No need to train like a jackass. Oh, that was pretty slow. Come on. Haven't done these for a few weeks, so not so good at them. When thinking about how do we encourage good technique or how do we create better technique over time, I think one of the most important things is to like acknowledge that the lifting technique, it's an emergent phenomenon. And like emergence, it's a concept that I touch on as much as possible because I think a lot of people just really struggle to wrap their head around it. It's back to this idea of moving away from linear cause effect thinking and respecting the complexity of things, respecting that there's multiple factors that affect technique and that we're not in control of all of them. We don't understand a lot of them as deep as we think we do. The way I look at technique or movement, it's this thing that emerges from these interactions between the task, the individual, and the environment. And it's not completely passive, but I just think that often we benefit from just sort of stepping back and you know, just explain the task to someone, give them an intent, and then just let them have a go at it. And then over time, we would expect that as they get more exposure to the task, their body adapts, they start to gain a better and more sophisticated understanding of like, oh, what am I actually trying to do here? Because again, a lot of tasks, like we look at them at face value. It's like, is a squat just a squat? Is a snatch just a snatch? And that's one of the things, just that letting people go through that journey themselves, just continuous exposure to that task and similar tasks. And then over time, just having faith in the human ability to improve at things that they've had practice with. And when you adopt this lens of the task, the individual and the environment, a lot of people just don't respect the individual. Like we see a lot of coaches, they sort of say that, oh yeah, you know, I know that everyone shouldn't lift exactly the same, but then you have a look at their entire client roster and everyone is lifting basically the same. So like I said, just taking a step back, giving them a task, giving them an intent, respecting their individuality and just sort of seeing what comes out of that and monitoring it over time. I mean, like, we don't have to perfect our technique from day one. It's something, you know, we've got this theoretical gold standard and we can just circle in on it closer and closer, a little bit by little bit each day. We don't have to hit it with a fucking bullseye, you know, because this was the old attitude before this whole movement optimism conversation kicked off, right? People were like, oh, you got to perfect your technique before you add any weight to the bar, otherwise you'll ingrain bad technique. And it's like, you know, the human body prioritizes efficiency. The CNS or just that lizard brain, it doesn't want to expend unnecessary calories. So like, if you've got genuinely shit technique, probably just need to step back and take another look at it or just practice it a little bit more. And then, like I said, over time, we build this more sophisticated understanding of the task and we develop a better solution for that problem. Have faith in that CNS of yours. Like, I'm not saying it'll always spit out good outputs, but 90% of the time, it's pretty good. Because for a lot of people, the alternative is, again, being really in your head when you lift. You know, let's say you're doing a back squat. Like, the biggest thing we need to focus on in a back squat, not falling over with a heavy weight on us and actually coming up. And you have so many people, they're so obsessed with technique and making things safe. They're thinking more about what way their knees are rotating than how hard they're pressing into the ground. I might do another video on this where I'm sitting down and not as caffeinated because maybe there was some stuff I missed. This is a pretty deep topic. If you want to understand a little bit more about this concept of emergence and, you know, a bit of a different lens for problem solving and understanding things, you know, complex systems, check out GPP Level 1. We really dive into it, and like I said, just the understanding complex systems, understanding this whole idea of emergence. It was pretty big. It helped me get better outcomes and improve the training experience for so many of my clients. So check out GPP Level 1. Go consume all the pre-recorded content, get into the community, say hey to the big dog. If not, I'll see you in a couple of days with another video.